Hello, and welcome to the Ananya CDC podcast. This is part of our multi-part series on the evolution of autism theories. I am Jewel. Today we are diving into the story behind behaviorism. It's a journey marked by brilliant ideas, deep regrets, and the personal toll on those caught in its way. This isn't just about theories or experiments. It's about real people whose lives were transformed for better or for worse by these approaches. Let's travel back in time and listen to their stories. In the dark days, during and just after World War II, society was desperate for order amid chaos and for solutions to the very real threats of war. Out of this turbulence emerged B.F. Skinner, a scientist who proposed a radical idea. If you reward behavior, you can shape it. Skinner's breakthrough experiments weren't just about academic curiosity. They had a very practical, even military applications. He wasn't just training pigeons to peck at targets for food in a lab setting. He was working on a project for the US military called Project Pigeon. The goal? To create a pigeon guided missile system.
Imagine a missile with a small compartment in the nose cone. Inside that compartment were three pigeons, trained to recognize the target, let's say an enemy ship, on a screen. If the image of the ship drifted off center, the pigeons would peck at the screen in the direction it needed to move to recenter. These pecks would translate into adjustments to the missile's guidance system, theoretically steering it towards the target.
The pigeons were conditioned using operant conditioning. The same principles Skinner would later apply to human behavior. They were rewarded with food for pecking correctly, shaping their behavior with remarkable precision. The project was eventually scrapped, not because it didn't work in tests. The pigeons were surprisingly accurate, but because the military ultimately favored electronic guidance systems. However, Project Pigeon demonstrated the power of Skinner's methods in a very dramatic and for some unsettling way. The idea that a pigeon could be trained to guide a weapon of war fueled both excitement and concern about the potential for controlling human behavior.
The notion that even a simple animal, in this case a bird, could learn to behave in such a complex and predictable way fueled hopes and anxieties that human actions could be guided in the same manner. It raised the question, if we can control animal behavior so precisely, what are the limits and the ethical implications of applying these techniques to people? Skinner's work promised a new frontier in understanding human behavior. But as his ideas spread, they began to affect not only clinical settings but also personal lives. His methods, although innovative, raised questions. What happens when every smile, every tear is measured and controlled? And what happens when those ideas are applied too close to home? It's important to acknowledge that even within behaviorism, there are nuances. Positive reinforcement, for example, is a technique when used thoughtfully and ethically can be a valuable tool in certain contexts. But the application of these principles, especially in early days, often lack that crucial ethical consideration.
B.F. Skinner was not just a scientist, he was also a father. His daughter, Deborah, grew up in a home that, in many ways, became a live demonstration of his theories. Imagine a young girl whose every expression was observed, her spontaneous laughter and unscripted tears recorded as if they were data points in an experiment. Deborah later recalled feeling like a lab rabbit, a phrase that carries with it both the tragedy and the irony of her experience.
Deborah's childhood was steeped in both love and science. Her father's passion for understanding behavior led him to create an environment where natural responses were measured, reinforced, and sometimes even discouraged if they deviated from the expected norm. In this household, every genuine moment could be seen as a variable to be optimized. While Skinner believed that such an approach could unlock human potential, for Deborah it meant that her true self was often suppressed in favor of a version that fit neatly into an experimental framework.
Her story isn't about malice, it's about a well meaning attempt to harness the power of science with consequences that no one could fully predict. Deborah's memories remind us that the cost of trying to perfect behavior may sometimes be the loss of the spontaneous, beautiful messiness that makes us human.
As decades passed and society continued to evolve, a new voice emerged in the field of behaviorism, one driven by both hope and a profound sense of urgency. Ivor Lovas, coming from mid 20th century America, witnessed firsthand how children who didn't fit into narrow definitions of normal were left behind. Convinced that every child deserved a chance to connect with the world, he set out to change lives. But to understand Lovas, we need to understand the context. Autism at the time was often profoundly misunderstood. Many believed these children were unreachable or untrainable. Institutionalization was common. Lovas, deeply affected by this, believed he could offer a different path. Lovas was working in a climate of desperation. Parents were desperate, institutions were overwhelmed, and the prevailing scientific view was bleak. He genuinely believed that intense early intervention was the only way to give these children a chance at a normal life. He cited studies on operant conditioning, on the plasticity of the young brain, and he presented his work as a rescue mission. The problem, of course, was method of that rescue.
In 1973, Lovas launched the Young Autism Project at UCLA. His approach was as ambitious as it was intense. Children received up to 40 hours a week of therapy. Behaviors such as eye contact, speech, and basic social interaction were reinforced through rewards. Parents, desperate for any sign of progress, clung to the promise that their children could be fixed and integrated into a world that had long shunned them.
Imagine the scene, a mother on the brink of despair, suddenly hearing her daughter say Mama for the first time. That moment of breakthrough was electrifying, a spark of hope in a long, dark struggle. Yet, behind these moments of joy lay methods that would soon reveal a darker side of Lova's legacy. He wasn't shy about using aversives, punishments to eliminate behaviors he deemed undesirable.
One story that still sends shivers down the spine is that of a young boy. We will protect his anonymity by changing his name. We'll call him Anthony. Anthony was a child struggling with self-harm, a desperate cry for help that Lovas believed needed immediate correction. To stop this behavior, his therapy sometimes included the use of electric shocks. Why was Anthony self-harming? We don't have all the details, and that's the part of the problem with these early records. Was it sensory overload, frustration, anxiety? The focus was on stopping the behavior, not necessarily understanding the underlying cause. For Anthony, that shock was not just a momentary jolt of pain. It was an experience that would leave a lasting imprint on his emotional life.
A report from that era described a similar case, a child who would bang his head against the wall. The therapist, following Lovas's protocol, administered a sharp slap to the child's face each time he engaged in the behavior. The head banging did decrease, but at what cost? The child became withdrawn, fearful, and the underlying distress that fueled the head banging was never addressed. The alternatives at the time were often limited or non existent. There was no widespread understanding of sensory processing issues, of the communicative function of behavior, or of the importance of creating a supportive and understanding environment. Imagine being a child, confused and hurting, and having your desperate signals met not with comfort, but with a shock meant to erase your pain. Anthony's world, already fraught with internal battles, was further marred by this method, a method that might have reduced a behavior but at the cost of a part of his spirit. His story is a stark reminder that the path to progress is often paved with choices that impact lives in ways no one can fully undo.
Many who underwent similar therapies later described their achievements in skills alongside the lingering scars of these interventions. They tell us that while you might teach someone to communicate, you can't simply erase the emotional pain that comes with it. And it's crucial to remember, aversives weren't the only tool Lovas used. He also used positive reinforcement, but the presence of aversives, even if used infrequently, cast a long shadow.
To truly understand these stories, we must step back and look at the world in which they unfolded. In the mid 20th century America, there was a powerful drive to conform, a societal belief that every child should fit a specific mold, The pressure to be normal was immense, and institutions, along with well meaning families, often embrace therapies that promise to make children conform to a standardized ideal.
For many parents, the promise of a therapy that could rescue their child from isolation was irresistible. In a world that valued conformity above individuality, even methods that carried great risks were seen as necessary sacrifice. These pressures helped fuel the widespread adoption of techniques that we now question, reminding us that sometimes the methods we choose are as much a product of their cultural movement as they are us of scientific reasoning. Reminding us that sometimes the methods we choose are as much a product of their cultural movement as they are of scientific reasoning.
In the end, the story of behaviorism is not just one of scientific inquiry, it's a human story set against the backdrop of a society in flux, struggling to balance the promise of progress with the need to protect the unique spirit of each child.
As we reflect on the journeys of Deborah, Anthony, and countless others, it becomes clear that the legacy of behaviorism is complex. The drive to harness human behavior through rewards and punishments brought both breakthroughs and deep regrets. Their stories remind us that progress, however well intended, must never come at the expense of the human heart.
Today, research and therapy for autism continue to evolve. New approaches, such as play based relationship centered therapies, seek to balance the need for skill development with essential task of nurturing individuality. The goal is to help every child flourish without forcing them to hide their authentic selves, a lesson learned from the past.
In our upcoming episodes in this series, we will explore these emerging therapies in greater detail.
Thank you for joining us on this journey today. The stories of Deborah, Anthony, and so many others remind us that behind every therapeutic method, there is a human life, a life filled with hope, struggle, and the enduring desire to be seen and understood. Let their experiences be a guide as we look forward to a future where every child is valued for who they truly are.
Until next time on the Ananya CDC podcast, let us keep these stories in our hearts as we continue to explore the evolution of autism theories. Together, we can forge a path forward that celebrates both scientific progress and the unique beauty of every human being.